With the election right around the corner and our ever-expanding network of podcasts, including our most recent edition, Still a Consciousness, there's never been a better time to become a member. In addition to no ads, members receive bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, access to our Discord community, and enhanced show notes for select shows. Our goal is to make the DSR Network membership accessible to everyone, so for the month of May, enjoy 60% off the normal monthly or annual price for the first month or first year. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code MAYDAY, one word, at checkout. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code MAYDAY. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week, Marjorie Taylor Greene is deciding whether to call a snap vote to oust Mike Johnson as House Speaker. She has a list of demands, and if they aren't met, she will pull the trigger. If so, Democrats seem prepared to step in and save Johnson. By the time you listen to this, Greene may have either backed off or reaffirmed her threat to forge ahead with trying to get rid of Johnson. But either way, this whole mess raises a bunch of hard questions. Can Democrats leverage anything in exchange for their willingness to protect Johnson from future efforts to oust him? Is there a real possibility of some kind of coalition governing? How does all this affect the battle for control of the House? Today we're talking to Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat of California and the number 4 in the House Democratic leadership, who's going to help us get to the bottom of all this. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you, Greg. Honored to be on your show.
So as of now, Marjorie Taylor Greene has made 4 demands of Johnson. A return to the so-called Hastert rule, which means nothing gets a vote unless a majority of Republicans support it, an end to funding for Ukraine, defunding the special counsel prosecutions of Donald Trump, and a 1% across-the-board spending cut. What's your immediate reaction to all this?
Thank you, Greg, for your question. We know that Marjorie Taylor Greene believes in extreme conspiracy theories. She's made anti-Semitic statements, and she is one of the leaders of the pro-Putin wing of the Republican conference. Her demands are completely unreasonable. For example, the Hastert rule is simply undemocratic. It would allow a minority of the House to control what kind of legislation gets voted on, and that is clearly not what the American people would want.
And the prosecution of Trump, I mean, obviously that's a non-starter for Democrats, but isn't that pretty telling? I mean, one of Greene's central demands in exchange for not plunging the House into chaos is that Trump not be held accountable to the law. This is what MAGA has devolved into. Your reaction to that?
In America, no one is above the law, and the American people should be asking, why is Marjorie Taylor Greene scared of law enforcement? Why is she anti-law enforcement? Why would she want to defund law enforcement when it comes to Donald Trump? He is, as any American is, entitled to the presumption of innocence. In a criminal trial, you've got to have the government prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury in order for the jury to convict. That's how the process works, and there's no reason to defund that process in any way.
By the time this podcast airs, we may know more about Greene's intentions, we may not, but either way, her demands are going to hang over the Speaker in one way or another. I gather that if Greene brings a motion to vacate the speakership, which she may or may not do, which would oust Johnson with a simple majority of the House, most Democrats appear prepared to step in and table that motion. Is that still the case?
I believe that is still the case, and let's look at how we got here. We got here because Kevin McCarthy and Republicans voted in a rules change to allow one person to try to fire the Speaker. Any one member of the House of Representatives can file a motion to vacate, which is basically a motion to fire. And all the Democrats opposed that rules change. So this really was a situation that the Republicans brought upon themselves, and now they're looking at Democrats to bail them out of this situation they've gotten themselves into. Now, with this particular motion to vacate, Marjorie Taylor Greene has said she's doing it because of the national security supplemental package that Speaker Johnson allowed on the floor to be voted on, including funding for Ukraine. That was the right thing to do, to give funding to Ukraine. And I think that Democrats are not going to allow Speaker Johnson to be punished for having done the right thing in this one particular instance.
I absolutely get the argument for doing it. It makes a lot of sense in some ways. I mean, some Democrats have told me, for instance, that they find Johnson more personally trustworthy than McCarthy ever was. And so Johnson seems to have done the right thing in this instance. Why should Greene be able to punish him for that? I do want to ask, though, does it complicate things if Johnson is saying he's open to trying to defund the prosecutions of Trump? I mean, that's a non-starter, won't go anywhere. But the mere fact that he's saying that seems like it should be a real problem for Democrats. What are your thoughts on that? Should that sort of complicate the decision as to whether to bail him out?
Well, let me first pick on your point about Johnson's trustworthiness. I happen to have known Mike Johnson pretty well. I'm vice chair of the Democratic Caucus. He was vice chair of the Republican Conference. So we worked together on a bunch of different issues. And this all happened before any of the speaker stuff started happening. And I've come to the conclusion that he is very, very conservative, but I also find him to be honest and credible. And because of that, I think that's one reason that Democrats are more willing in this particular instance to not let him fail, because he did do the right thing by allowing a vote on the Ukraine aid. Now, in terms of defunding the prosecutions, first of all, that's just not going to happen, because even if it manages to pass the House, which I'm not sure it would, there's no way the Senate will allow that to happen. There's no way the administration will allow that to happen. And the American people would be opposed to it, because no one wants to defund the police or defund law enforcement.
Right. I think there's no question that it wouldn't happen. I just wonder whether Democrats need to draw a bit of a line on that. I can kind of see the arguments in both ways. I think it's worth pointing out, by the way, to your point about how the American people would probably oppose a lot of this stuff. If Greene keeps making these demands, it could be really bad for vulnerable House Republicans in marginal districts, right? Chaos by itself hurts them, for starters. Beyond that, the things she wants aren't going to be very popular in those districts. Defunding Trump prosecutions, deep spending cuts, an end to Ukraine aid. Vulnerable Republicans don't want to be associated with that, do they? And is there a way for Democrats to seize on this in the battle for the House? What does that look like?
Marjorie Taylor Greene's demands are not only extreme, they're opposed by the overwhelming majority of the overwhelming majority of the American people. And that means Republicans in swing districts will be taking very hard votes that the majority of their constituents would oppose. And we'll see what Speaker Johnson does, but I don't really see how it helps Republicans whatsoever to give in to Marjorie Taylor Greene's demands.
Is there some way to leverage this in the battle for the House?
Well, we'll see the votes that Speaker Johnson puts up for Republicans to take. I just want to note, for example, that Democrats have been focused on putting people over politics and lowering costs and fighting for job creation and reproductive freedom. And what are Republicans putting on the floor? They're putting on essentially bills to talk about refrigerators and laundry and dishwashers. There's no reason that home appliances should have more rights than women in America. And yet they're putting on these stupid bills about appliances. That's where they are. And I think the American people see that this is an unserious attempt at legislation.
Yeah, it does seem like these are going to be pretty unpopular things and really seem like message bills, to the MAGA base and so forth. Here's my question. Does it hurt Democratic efforts to take back the House if they continue to bail out Johnson? What's your thinking on that dynamic? How long can Democrats reasonably put up with all these insane House GOP bills before they stop being willing to help Johnson? Does it backfire on Democrats if they bail him out in their effort to take the House, because it makes the Republican conference look marginally more stable and able to govern and so forth? What's the thinking there?
That's a great question. I'm just going to lay out the reality, which is that Democrats actually don't want to have catastrophe happen to our country. If you look at what happened this term, It was Democrats who were the adults in the room, and we provided the majority of votes under Hakeem Jeffries' leadership to prevent a catastrophic default on our nation's debts. We provided the majority of votes under Hakeem Jeffries' leadership to prevent Republican attempts at government shutdowns. And Democrats provided the majority of votes under Hakeem Jeffries' leadership to provide aid to our allies. So I think the American people see that it's actually Democrats who have been the adults in the room and have, in fact, been the ones that are governing America during crisis situations. So I think this actually helps Democrats going into November.
In other words, your thinking is that the perception that Democrats are willing to stabilize the House by supporting Johnson actually ends up being an argument for Democratic control of the House. Is that right?
Yes. I think the American people want to see our country not descend into chaos and into situations that are both stupid and unnecessary. And they see Democrats time and time again coming to the rescue and providing the majority of votes to do the right thing for the American people.
What do you anticipate House Republicans doing going forward to kind of mend fences with the MAGA wing? I mean, right now we're in a situation where there's a lot of anger at Johnson for teaming up with Democrats and passing the big package that you mentioned earlier. Won't Republicans have to do something truly crazy in order to make MAGA happy now, like, say, push forward with impeachment of the president, or more likely, since the impeachment push has really imploded, hold these bogus votes on things like referring prosecutions to DOJ on the Biden quote-unquote crime family, as Trump puts it? Do you anticipate some things like this coming from Republicans in an effort to give MAGA something now that they are kind of licking their wounds over the supplemental?
I think Speaker Johnson and moderate Republicans, especially those on swing seats, have a choice. They can cave in to the demands of the MAGA wing of the party, or they can try to sideline them and work on behalf of the American people. And what we've seen in a number of cases are bills being passed on suspension, which basically requires a 2/3 vote of the House, requiring both Democrats and Republicans voting together. And oftentimes on those votes, you see MAGA Republicans voting no. And these bills are bills that generally help the American people move the American family forward. And I urge the Republican caucus to continue doing that, because I think it's much better to work together on a bipartisan basis and work together to solve our country's problems instead of caving in to the extreme demands of the MAGA wing.
Let me shift gears on this for a second. So Johnson and other Republicans are talking a good game about holding these quote-unquote anti-Semitism hearings, which are, in their own words, designed to divide the Democrats against each other and so forth. They're going to haul college administrators and so forth before Congress and try to paint Democrats as aiders and abettors of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence on campus. Is there an opening to turn the tables for Democrats here? I mean, the MAGA wing of the party has trafficked in all kinds of sick anti-Semitic tropes, from great placement theory to the smearing of Soros. Is there a way for Democrats to use these hearings to say, wait a minute, you guys don't have a leg to stand on this stuff? Maybe things like putting some of these crazy quotes from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Johnson about Soros up on big screens. Is there an opening to do that kind of thing?
First of all, I reject Speaker Johnson's framing. Democrats don't support anti-Semitism. In fact, quite the opposite. Democrats have been introducing bills to counter anti-Semitism. There's a bill, for example, by Democratic member Kathy Manning that will provide resources to our Department of Education in order to address issues of anti-Semitism at our country's educational institutions. Republicans don't want to pass that bill, which provides the funding. So Democrats are ones that are trying to get resources out there to counter anti-Semitism. And Democrats also believe in free speech. So we want people to be able to speak and to let their views be known, even if we disagree with those views. but we don't support violence because that's not protected by the First Amendment. That's a very clear line. So I don't think these hearings are going to in any way hurt Democrats because Democrats oppose anti-Semitism. We support free speech, and I think that's a pretty easy line to draw.
Is there an opening, though, to point out that a sizable chunk of the Republican caucus has pushed anti-Semitic tropes themselves? It seems like it's a bit of a gimme there, like they're leaving themselves vulnerable to this being pointed out, and press is going to be all over these types of hearings. Is there not an opening to kind of say, hey, wait a minute, look at what these guys have been saying?
You're right. There absolutely is an opening. The leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, has made anti-Semitic statements. He has said, for example, there are good people on both sides in the Nazi Charlottesville march. And you have a number of MAGA Republicans that have made statements that either are anti-Semitic or sound close to being anti-Semitic. So I think it'd be much better if both parties actually work together to try to pass laws to counter anti-Semitism, such as the bill by Kathy Manning that would actually provide resources to help counter anti-Semitism instead of doing hearings to try to do gotcha moments at various people.
Obviously, cooperation would be better. The thing is that Republicans are explicitly saying that they're holding these hearings for political purposes. So I'm not seeing the chances of cooperation really soar here. Can I ask, you mentioned a little earlier that under the suspension of the rules that there's really kind of an opening for big majorities in the House to pass things, even with the MAGA wing opposed. What kind of possibilities are there for this kind of coalition governing going forward? Is there any way to reach some kind of understanding with Johnson where he kind of is willing to volunteer certain things in exchange for getting bailed out? Do you anticipate any broad cooperation on anything else of importance going forward?
I think there definitely is an opportunity to have more of a coalition government. I simply note that that is de facto what we've had this term, because, again, it was Democrats providing the majority of votes under Leader Jeffries' leadership on critical issues such as preventing catastrophic default, preventing government shutdowns, supporting our allies. And we've got some must-pass bills coming up this term, such as reauthorizing the Federal Aviation Administration, such as the Farm Bill. So there are some important issues that hopefully we can get bipartisan cooperation on.
Just to bring this back to Marjorie Taylor Greene to close this all out, it looks to me like whatever happens in the immediate run on this threat to oust Johnson, like I say, by tomorrow when people listen to this, we may have a little more information, we may not. But whatever happens there, Greene is going to continue to make demands. There also seems to be a clear kind of pacification of MAGA happening in the fact that Mike Johnson really stiff-armed MAGA to pass the stuff that they hate, Ukraine aid and so forth. What I want to ask you is, do you see MAGA as defanged or not? Do you see Marjorie Taylor Greene as kind of defanged, or is there a scenario in which she kind of zombie-like keeps coming and she actually continues to represent some genuine sentiment in the Republican conference? Does she continue to really damage the Republican Party in a major way going forward?
I think it's very clear that the MAGA wing of the Republican conference has grown to be much more unpopular now than they were 2 years ago. And the overwhelming majority of American people reject the policies supported by MAGA Republicans. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene still has enormous influence in the Republican conference. The fact that Speaker Johnson would spend hours meeting with her tells you something. And so we will see as the year goes on whether or not Speaker Johnson and moderate Republicans will cave in to MAGA wing, or if they'll work with Democrats and advance values important to American people.
Well, she certainly doesn't seem like she's going to go away anytime soon. Congressman Ted Lieu, thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you, Greg.
Folks, please make sure to check out some new content up at TNR.com right now. Matt Ford looks at a new effort by 13 conservative judges to say they won't hire from Columbia University, a blatant abuse of power and a blatant abuse of their judicial office. And Timothy Noah explaining the right's new attack on Biden for creating the wrong kind of jobs. We'll see you all tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.